photo that I have sold for the most amount of money is not very good. And I always wished I could go in there and redo it. But back then, I made the mistake of not keeping my raw images. Why? I don't know. I was new and dumb and I just didn't know. So now I keep all of my raws, but this was one that I always had just written off to, well, I guess I'll try better next time. But wouldn't you know it, I was going through an old hard drive and I found the raw of this image. So I'm going to show you the image that I created originally. I'm going to show you what was wrong with it. And then we're going to do a live edit, redo it, and see if it's any better. So this was it. This was taken on a summer solstice evening. The sunset was just beautiful. And I was very, very happy with this image when I took it. However, there are some problems. And you can see that it's pretty dark for one thing. You can see that my masking wasn't very good and that it probably slipped over into the water here. I either didn't notice it or didn't care or was sloppy, whatever. It's super dark. I think what I did on this one is just go into presets, pick a preset, and then maybe make some adjustments and call it good. But you can see that this is a flagpole and it's not straight. This lamppost is not straight. And if we zoom in on this lamppost, this is a screenshot, so it's not super high resolution, but look at this chromatic aberration. And that's the one thing that really has bothered me about this photograph is we've got chromatic aberration all over the place on this photo. And that's something that happens when you're using an inexpensive lens that's wide open. It tends to have that problem. I didn't know about that problem and I didn't know how to fix it back then. So I think at first glance, people tend to enjoy this photo, and I do too. But now that I've progressed in my editing skills, I just see what's wrong with it. And I was super excited to find that original raw so that I can redo this photo, and it's probably gonna look a bit different. This was taken with a Canon T5i, which was the camera that I started out with, and the EFS 18-135 lens. So not super high quality glass, not a super high quality body, still a great body. I mean, it got me started and took some great photos, but still a photograph that I think might be worth saving. So let's edit this together and let's see what we can come up with. So here is the raw, and I've already gone through here and made some changes to it. Oh, watch this. I'm about to get attacked by a cat, I think. For whatever reason, that cat loves to attack me while I'm working. So anyway, back to the photo. This is the original raw photograph. And I've hit auto settings on this just to see what that did. But you can see this is remarkably different than this one. And so you can kind of see what I did here. Like I put in some masking down here to bring out the light, put in some masking along this walkway to bring out some light here, really masked that sky out. And the effect is cool. It looks really good, but it's not realistic. And it's just a little bit sloppy. So if we go back to this raw, where would I start on this? I think now I might, look first to change the color profile to Adobe Landscape, which tends to really just bring out the vibrancy. So I'd probably start there. And then I'm gonna go down and change what I wish I would have changed early on because it's just so easy to do. Look at this chromatic aberration. We've got these colors here on the side of this light pole, but if we just click this little button, those are gonna go away. Simple as that. And then lens corrections is gonna take some of that warping out. You can see that it recognizes what lens was used and it just flattens out that image a little bit. Really cool to do that. The other thing that we can do though, is we still don't have this like vertical photograph. And sometimes there's not a whole lot you can do about that, but that flagpole, it should be vertical. So if we go into our crop area here and we go down to geometry and this upright, and if we just go here and click auto, watch what that does. Now we have an image that has an upright light post and an upright flagpole. This doesn't always work. Sometimes if it's just too extreme, it crops the photo weird and it just doesn't work. But in this case, it did a really nice job. So I think doing those few things, lens corrections, remove aberrations, and then crop for upright, we're gonna have a much higher quality photograph to begin with. Another thing that I like to do when I'm starting to edit a photograph is to come down to this color calibration tool, which there's another video on where to find this color calibration tool, which I'm going to link below. Here, like we have our red primaries, and so then we can just play with saturation and just see what that does. So in this case, I'd probably pull up that red saturation here. Then we have our green primaries. We can do the same thing. If we just pull all the color out and then put it all back in, you can see what that does. I like to increase that saturation here a little bit. And even if it seems like it's overboard, we're going to go in and fix that in more detail. So don't worry about that right now. And then let's look at blue primaries and do the same thing. You can see that this is a pretty cool photograph looking at the white. The white is more blue than it probably should be. So if I pull out some of that saturation of the blues, that's going to help fix that. And the next thing we can do after that is to go back into our color white balance. Right now, white balance is as shot. There's a couple ways we can do this here. We can just go down to auto and daylight and cloudy and just see the difference that it makes. The other thing is we can choose this little eyedropper tool here and then click on what should be white, which in this case would be this walkway. This is a white walkway. And so if we just click that, then it's going to automatically change the color, the white balance, to what it needs to be to make the whites white. And I'm pretty happy with that. That's pretty close to how it would have looked. And already, look at the difference. This is the original photograph. This is where we are so far on the re-edit. I do think that I want to bring the shadows. I want to reduce the shadows and maybe increase the exposure on this foreground here. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. We could mask it with a linear gradient or a series of radial gradients. Another way to do it, so if I go into the mask section and select sky, what it's going to do is select the sky, just like we told it to, but you can see that it also selected this part of the ocean. It left this part of the ocean alone, but selected this part of the water as part of the sky, which obviously we don't want. And there are a couple ways to get rid of that. I think the quickest way is going to hit our subtract button here and go down to brush and then just brush that area out. So I'm going to reduce the size of the brush a little bit. I'm going to reduce the feather of our brush a little bit, and I'm going to just move flow and density down just a tiny little bit here. But I'm just going to then paint out the part of the mask that I don't want, because I only want to select the sky. I don't want to impact this part of the ocean like I did in that original edit of this photograph. So if we take that out, we're going to be in much better shape. Then another thing I like to do when I'm doing a sky mask is to intersect it with a linear gradient. So I'm going to hit our little 3 buttons here on the side of our mask, and then I'm going to go down to intersect with mask using a linear gradient. I'm just going to click somewhere right around here and pull a linear gradient down. And what that's going to do is just reduce the harshness of the border between the sky mask and the water. So you can see with that just left a nice little bit of almost like a haze along the horizon. So if we take that out, you can kind of see that it just is it's a harsher look. And if we put that back in, it just creates this nice little gradient border between the sky mask and the water. And that's super important. I have the overlay on, so if I turn the overlay off, it's going to be a little less noticeable, but still in a pretty good place. So now with the sky selected, then I can go down and pull my highlights down. And I think that looks pretty good. I can play with some contrast a little bit, or probably bring the contrast up just a tiny little bit. I might bring the exposure down just a tiny little bit. I like to bring the whites up in skies just to kind of highlight those clouds. But then you can also see, you can watch our histogram also up here, but we have this little arrow checked, and what that's going to do is show us the areas that get blown out with highlights. So I can deselect that, and those red highlights will go away. And then if I select it again, it's going to show us the parts that are highlighted. So that's good to know, because if we pull up our whites too much, we're going to see the parts of the photograph that are blown out, just too white. So I'm just going to pull those down a little bit and just till they're not there anymore, or just very, very slightly. I can pull the blacks down a little bit too. That's just another way to do contrast. Instead of using the contrast slider, we can bring the whites up and the blacks down. It's a nice little way to just work with the contrast a little bit more in the photograph. I think that's looking pretty decent in the sky. I could even bring up the magenta a little bit. Obviously, like in that original picture, it was way too high. And so I think if we just bring that up just a tiny little bit, we're going to be in pretty good shape. And then to do like reduce shadows on this foreground area, again, there's a few ways to do that, but I'm just going to do it a simple way. And I'm just going to duplicate and invert this mask. So to do that, we're going to have everything that is not the sky selected. We could go in there and really fine tune this mask and get rid of the palm trees and the light posts and that sort of stuff. I don't know that we're going to make changes that are big enough to be noticeable. Because what we will start to run into is you can see that this mask also selected some of the sky behind the trees. And that's a pretty common problem. So we need to be careful of that so we don't get those halos inside the trees. But let's just play with this and see what happens. If we just do as we've done here and then decrease the shadows, that's kind of start to give the effect that I want in there. Highlights, probably not going to make too much of a difference here. I'm going to pull those highlights up just a tiny little bit. I'm going to bring the whites up also. Just really pull out the white of this walkway. And I think that's starting to look pretty good. Next thing, so I'm going to leave masking alone from there. And then I like to go down into the color grading area, which is here. And here we can select individual colors and we can change the hue, the saturation, and the luminance of each color. And to start out, I'll just go into each one of these. Like if I just pull out all of the red, you can see it just doesn't make a difference, which means there's no red in this photograph. So if I just leave that red saturation all the way down, it's going to be fine. Orange, there's obviously a lot of orange in here. If I pull that out, you can see what that does. If I increase the saturation, you can see what that does. So it's personal preference, but move that saturation slider to the place that makes you happy. And then you can play with the hue too. And if you did want to pull back in some of that magenta, you can just move this slider over here and just kind of pull in a little bit more of that. And luminance is going to control how bright those oranges are. We can make them brighter, we can make them less bright. And again, it's personal preference on what you like. I'd probably go somewhere around there. And again, this is just a quick edit just to show the difference in what I would have done versus what I did. And so this is fun for me to go back and look at this photograph and just see what its potential really was. So with yellows, if I decrease all the saturation on the yellow, you can see that there's a lot of yellow in this photo. I'm going to start to pull some of that back in. You can't go too high because then it's super oversaturated and it just doesn't look right. So be careful with your saturation levels. May even call it good there. And greens, let's see if there's any green in this thing. If we pull all the greens out and up, out, tiny little bit. So I'll just leave the green saturation down. Same with this one, this aqua. I don't imagine there's going to be a lot of aqua in this. There's not. And let's see what blue does now, actually. If we pull all the blues out, see just really in the sky here in that top left corner. And I'll probably pull up the saturation of that blue so we just get some of that nice blue sky coming back. And here, I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of this color. No, I'm just going to leave that saturation down. And then finally, we have our purpley pinks type color here. And again, not a lot there. So I'm going to leave that down also. I think we're looking pretty good. So if I go down here to my color grading and midtones and my shadows and highlights, see what happens if we pull those midtones up versus pull them down. We pull those down a little bit. We can also control where we want our midtones. Here we're working on the kind of the reddish oranges here, which is right where I want it to be. So I'm not going to change that. I'm just going to leave those where they are. And highlights, I might pull up the highlights just a little bit. End up somewhere around there. So I think this is looking pretty cool. And then, so what I would have done last time is I would have added, I'm going to do this and just see what I think of it. But if I go in and just add a radial gradient down here, and just pull in some of that light from under this bridge. I don't know if I'm gonna like that or not. That might be okay to add just a tiny little bit of light there, but I'm not gonna mess with that too much beyond that. Now that's probably pretty close to where I would finish this photograph, which is obviously a huge difference from this one. This one looks super amateur to me, and yes, it's pretty, and at first glance, people tend to really like it, but to me, this is just way overdone, and it just doesn't look good to me. And I'm super excited that I had the opportunity to go in and redo it. This looks far more natural. This is something that is more in tune with my style today. I might move the clarity down, come down to your effects section, take the clarity. I like to, typically it's just kind of standard practice on my photos is I'll pull the clarity down a little bit. I'll pull the dehaze down a little bit just to kind of give it a really soft look. You can see if we go the other way on dehaze, it's going to give it just a more contrasty saturated look. And I'm kind of moving away from that look and just going a little bit more, a little softer. I might add some vignetting. Maybe not. Maybe just a little bit of vignetting. I don't want to lose too much of the pier going into the distance back there. But anyway, I think I'd probably end up somewhere around there. I'm super excited that I got to go in there and remove those aberrations, straighten out my lines, redo my masking, and bring the colors back to a more realistic look to how it looked in real life. So again, we started out here and we ended here. What do you think? Which one do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.